post about it on all your social media platforms to show support. The week of the 18th through the 24th, that's what's called the Week of Action. Kansas Wesleyan is going to be doing a clothesline project, which entails decorating t-shirts and hanging them up, showing all different kinds of tactics of domestic violence and what have you. And then October 30th, that's a Friday, Glow Yoga at 8 p.m. to support survivors, and that's at the Kansas Wesleyan Student Center. So that's what we got. Hope to see everybody there.
Your 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock
Yes.
Presentation on Facebook, what page is that on?
If you just go to the Domestic Violence, the DVAC Facebook page, and follow us there, then you'll see, and your Facebook typically will give you a little notification that says, hey, Facebook is live, so, or DVAC is live.
I wanted to make sure everybody knew where to go for that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Ms. Hunter, I have a certificate for you. Thank you for your work and thanks for being here. Yeah, can't do that now. I know. Good job. Thank you. It's a hard habit to break, isn't it? Okay, with that, we will move into Citizens Forum. This is an opportunity for someone to come forward and talk about something that is not on the agenda. You have 5 minutes. If you come forward, please give us your name and where you're from. Okay, no, nothing for Citizens Forum. That will move us into the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of October 5, 2020. Item 6.2, resolution number 20-7887, authorizing the mayor to sign an agreement to lengthen the tolling period in the consent decree which relates to the former Schilling Air Force Base site.
Okay, is there an item a commissioner would like to have removed? Okay, if not, I would accept a motion to approve.
Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda, and noting that the minutes of October 5th were originally published with an error in them, and they've been corrected.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, to approve consent agenda items 6.1 and 6.2. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. That will bring us to item 7.1.
Item 7.1, resolution number 20-7879, authorizing the mayor to execute an amended and restated sidewalk cafe license agreement with PB&J Restaurants, Inc.
Okay, Ms. Driscoll.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. As you'll recall, last week we dealt with two resolutions before you, Resolution 20-7878, and then the one that we are addressing this evening, Resolution 20-7879. 20-7878 had to do with amending an existing resolution that addressed the placement and additional dimensional requirements for sidewalk dining license. In doing that, we were able to move the clear path of travel from 6 feet to 5 feet, noting that that would work better overall in our newly designed downtown sidewalks, in addition to the other infrastructure that have been applied there, while still remaining ADA compliant and being able to be an active sidewalk environment. After analyzing the additional sidewalk dining licenses that we have approved, there's still one that is in violation or needs to be corrected, and that is the southern light post in front of Yaya's European Bistro at the hotel. That issue is addressed through a proposed change to the license agreement. Code currently allows and has allowed that for those distances that are above 4 feet below that requirement, once 6, now 5, can receive a variation or an exemption from the City Commission. And it specifically highlights things like light posts, mailboxes, other necessary infrastructure that may create those pinch points but are essential in that sidewalk environment. After last week's meeting, the City Commission asked us to further look at where a light post could be moved if an exemption to that rule was not the reasonable solution. And so staff has done further research and identified in graphics attached in today's packet where that new light post would move to if it did. Staff also identified a cost of $3,370 to move that light post. So before you today, and as requested by the City Commission, your alternatives are to approve Resolution 20-7879, amending the Sidewalk Cafe Dining License Agreement formally approved by the City Commission on March 3rd, 2020 with PB&J Restaurant, Inc., and formally authorize the exception of a light pole within the unobstructed walkway as allowed by Resolution 20-7878 that is less than 5 feet and more than 4 feet from the sidewalk dining area, or 2, approve Resolution number 20-7879 with amendments the City Commission deems appropriate, or 3, postpone consideration of 20-7879 to a specified date and time to provide staff direction regarding additional information or amendments the City Commission would like to request, or 4, vote to deny Resolution 20-7879 resulting in a non-compliant sidewalk walkway, or 5, make a motion directing staff to move the light pole to a location that resolves the violation. With that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. 4 of us were here last week, and so I guess I'll look to my right to start with Commissioner Davis. Do you have any questions?
Questions, no. I have an idea of how to resolve it, but all my questions have been answered.
Any other commissioners have any questions?
I wanted to start by thanking staff for providing me with a copy of the original cafe's license application, because it was interesting to look through the diagrams. While the light posts didn't appear to be marked in the actual plans, they were shown in the renderings, and I think it is kind of revealing for our process. It's easy to see how that broke down. I guess a question for Mr. Scragg. Were we planning to deal with this under this item or under other business? We had talked last week about the punch list of outstanding items that we've got concerns with downtown, or is that going to occur at a later meeting?
That's actually in the agenda planner for next week.
Okay.
Staff's had some conversation with the contractor and others, gathering information, but we've calendared it for next week.
Okay.
Commissioner Hodges, also staff discussed one of the suggestions that you made last week on having visuals for when someone is trying to place their use, not just sidewalk dining, but others. So in talking with engineering over the winter, we're going to directionally analyze all those different sections to create kind of that graphic that you were hoping for. So if somebody, whether they're a busker, sidewalk dining, if a certain use just isn't possible in that built environment, which we'll be testing through the winter, and one, it's a ground truthing of do these measurements or these setbacks as we're proposing in code going to work now that we actually have a built environment. So before we bring that to you in the spring, we'll know they work. But 2, if there's certain sections that just those uses aren't applicable, you would know that as an applicant by being able to look at these graphics. Essentially, you'll be able to see all of downtown on an aerial, and then we'll break down each block by north, south, east, and west sides of the block in kind of colored denotion like you were talking about, so you could see where you should place yourself. I think it'll help with compliance for all sides and just make it easier to use some of the code.
Thank you. Yeah, it just seemed like something that if you know right off the bat, if you're looking at renting or purchasing a property, that you're not going to be able to use it for, say, the sidewalk dining. I noticed that I walked downtown this morning, and I noticed that a lot, since we're having the sidewalk dining being attached to the specific business, it does force traffic, pedestrian traffic, onto the bricks. Mm-hmm. And some of the bricks, I don't know what ADA guidelines are in terms of a slope, but it looked to me like there were an awful lot of sloped bricks that mean that it wouldn't be an appropriate passageway if there were sidewalk dining that took the existing concrete. So it might be something to keep in mind too, some of those slopes on that. And then I did spend some time watching people going back and forth downtown, and it was really interesting. sadly, it wasn't just the South Pole, but also the North Pole. As people exited Starbucks, I think there were 4 different pairs that I watched. They all initially started side by side, and then they split around the pole. Came back together, then split around the North Pole. So, when we're looking at, what's a comfortable distance that you want to walk next to somebody, I guess it varies on the type of couple, but what we're providing obviously didn't feel comfortable to them, and I know that we've already adopted the 5-foot ordinance. The last thing I would love to have you look at, there were 2 obstructions in front of that, on that corner. One, and I can send you a picture of it, is an actual a round thing in the ground with a bolt sticking up that looked like it would be easy for somebody to trip, or if you have somebody who's visually impaired trying to find their way. And I think that it's probably a good idea to look where we have the sculpture tour sign mounted for that piece, because if you're not paying attention, the profile as you're walking north and south, especially south coming out of Starbucks, I mean, it would be very easy to overlook it and catch your heel on it or catch your toe on it. And the sign looks great, but I think we might want to look at where we've got that located.
Well, we could possibly reach out to the Accessibility Advisory Board prior to bringing the final code to you guys and having a discussion with them, maybe going over those graphics and seeing if, where there's not an optimal place, highlighting on, optimal routes, things like that. I mean, in my experience in working with downtowns and with compliance like that, it's known that you're not always going to be able to 100% have kind of the perfect width all the time in order to accommodate all these other things. So you start kind of trying to find where that's at. But I think the people maybe to best give us the feedback are those who are representing those individuals, in addition to what we have in code. So the Accessibility Advisory Board might be an excellent source to have that discussion with.
I agree. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, do we have any public comment?
Would it be okay for me to remove this?
It's fine with me.
Yeah, okay, thanks. A little distracting, and trying to talk with that is difficult at times. So my name is John Blanchard. I live in Salina, Kansas. First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor and vice mayor for both answering my email and getting a hold of me and having a nice conversation about some of the concerns that I have from a landscape architect's perspective on the streetscape and the placement of the light poles in respect to the pedestrian ways. I watched the meeting last week, and it seemed like we're arbitrarily changing our ordinance from 6 feet with the option of going 5 to 4 with your approval, which would have meant that every single one of these could have been approved without a change in the ordinance. I think the change in the ordinance is short-sighted, and I'll tell you why. You don't really, from a site planning standpoint, you don't just make an ordinance or a guideline based on what other cities are doing. It'd be like in law or in medicine saying, every case is the same, so we're going to apply this law to this case, or we're going to apply this diagnosis to all the patients. They're individuals. We have a unique situation here, and I think we created part of the problem, but we have basically 16 and a half feet from the face of the curb to the building. I don't know how familiar staff is with the different zones of a sidewalk, but a sidewalk actually has 4 functional zones. You have a frontage zone, which is up against the building, and it allows for and accommodates the opening and closing of doors and movements right around the entries of buildings. You have a pedestrian zone, and our frontage zone is basically nothing. A lot of our frontage zones are inset in a lot of the buildings that you see. The pedestrian zone that we have is probably best visualized out there if you walk the street as the concrete area. It's 8 foot 6 inches roughly wide. That is a main free space or pedestrian space, or different ways of looking at it, but that is the pedestrian zone. The third zone is a furnishing or furniture or service zone, and that's designated out on our streetscape by the bricks. It's really generous because it's 6 feet wide. And then you have a curb zone, which ours is 2 feet wide. And the reason why each individual community is different is because, like on a curb zone, not all curb zone, if Lawrence has it 2 feet wide, we don't adopt 2 feet wide just because Lawrence does. Lawrence might have 45-degree angle parking with 18 feet of depth for their parking. Ours happens to be 16 feet of depth and a more steep parking angle. That means that the curb area accommodates for overhangs of bumpers that come into it. So you want to make sure that your light standards are outside of that curb, out of that curb zone. And so our curb zone isn't necessarily going to be the same as any other community. The same thing goes for our furnishing zone. We have light fixtures, we have benches, we have planters, planter urns, all these other things in our furnishing zones. And that's also an area that is designed to accommodate loading and unloading, because we not only have hotels downtown, but we have a lot of restaurants that generally people arrive in groups, and also people that are shopping that sometimes load and unload, on the curb and so on. So in addition to seasonal changes, you have snow storage. A lot of times you'll
About another minute, if you could.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay,
Hopefully I'm not boring anybody here, but I'm just trying to kind of get to some of the considerations. As far as the light fixture that goes, I think that both of the light fixtures at the Yayas probably need to be moved to accommodate the pedestrian. The problem is that the dining area takes up the entire 8-foot 6-inch pedestrian ways, places all the traffic over on the 6-foot furnishing way and the 2-foot curb zone. And the problem with that is why you want to look at it at a case-by-case basis is that the south one in particular is 4 feet 2 inches wide. You have that 4 feet 2 inches, but to go around to the other side of the curb, you only have 20 inches. Now, we have an aging community. We have people, if people have disabilities and so on, we really don't want to force them around there. So the best solution would be, because we're not going to get rid of the outdoor dining, but to relocate that light fixture, and you run into kind of the same issue on the north light as well. So my recommendation with you is that certainly I think the outdoor dining, it looks nice. I think it adds vibrancy. It's well done there. They did the best they could with it. But we really, ideally, we would have had more coordination between the site planners for the hotel and the HDR. But I think that I think our furnishing zone is overly generous, and so just for safety considerations, I would ask that I'd hate to see someone slip and fall off of that curb and get seriously injured. Plus, when you start forcing them out in that curbway is where cars are pulling in, and their bumpers have the potential to conflict. So hopefully you'll, when you revisit this zone earlier, I would really be careful about and looking at a case-by-case basis when you do grant a 4-foot wide, that maybe you have 4 feet and at least 3 feet on the other side, but make sure you're accommodating for a safe pedestrian space. And thank you again for the phone call and for you as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion or action.
Just one question after Mr. Blanchard's comment. The light pole that's not referenced in this matter, is there a concern about the spacing around that? I'm not necessarily looking up here, but anyone else? I mean, is it in a situation where it should need to be considered for movement as well?
Depending
Based on these other measurements?
That one is 5, I don't.
That's what I was trying to find, was that dimension.
Yeah, from last week, that was 5 foot, and I didn't bring my,
Here, I can have it in just a second. I'm scrolling, sorry. But it is compliant. It is in the 5-foot range.
and I'm down there quite a bit. I've been to Yaya's and them, Starbucks several times a week, and just today, because I again been paying attention, the south one is tight, but you can go 2 across. The other one, in fact, today there was this morning there was 2. I call them elderly ladies, probably a little older than I am. So, but they were doing sculpture tour, and I watched them, and they both walked between the fence and the light pole with no problem. They had just finished at the sculpture in front of the hotel there, and we're headed south. So, that one's not quite 6 foot, but I think it has sufficient width that I don't have any problem with that one. The 4-foot one is a little tight. It does meet ADA. That was the only reason that last week I felt like it was okay. But
if I might weigh in, the north one has enough space because it's a little bit offset. It looks a little different. I don't want to say strange, but I mean, you can tell that you're going to have to kind of weave through it. The south one, I went down there again and looked again. And, you know, it is just uncomfortable. I look at that and I just, you know, and I know it meets ADA standards and all of that, but to me, it feels uncomfortable. And I think that maybe some of the things Mr. Blanchard talks about explains some of that in terms of the zones and the spacing that's required. But I'm still where I was last week. I think that one should move.
That one, the north pole is 5 foot 4 inches. The south pole, which we're talking about at the moment, is 4 foot 3 inches. Yeah. That 5 foot 4 is the same as the one in front of Blue Sky. Yeah. So if that one is an issue, we probably need to look at others that are in that same category.
My question would be, we're looking at moving the light pole. Is there a reason that it needs to be moved, or do we just take it down and not move it? Just remove it?
One of the things that staff recognized, yes, of course we could take it down, but lighting in that area, there's quite a bit of ambient light right in front of the hotel, but we could use additional light towards that corner, and that's that relocation portion. And you'll notice too in the aerials and graphics provided, it would actually then mirror across the street.
I saw that.
So I don't think it'll look out of place to move it. We already own it. So otherwise we have to find some place to store it if we're just going to take it down. And that location would provide greater light. I think from a safety perspective, it's always nice to have where you have pedestrian crossing and increase greater light down that area.
Are the hubs or the skirts at the bottom of the poles fungible? Could you change it? Could you remove them? They're probably 18 inches, I would imagine, in diameter, so you could maybe cover 8 or 9 inches in either of those spots if the pole is straight up and down like the light pole on the corner is that's attached by the bolts.
That I do not have an answer to. I don't know if Dan Stack is down here, if he might be able to address, you know, changing out the base of the light, if that's something that would accommodate greater space, but that is not something I'm aware of. And if the city commission wishes so, we could do more research on that.
I think you'd probably lose some of the aesthetics of the other poles being that way. So,
well, then the other disadvantage of not having that wide base, if you're bringing a motorized scooter or wheelchair through there, if that wheel hits the base, it's just going to bounce off. If it hits the pole itself, it's going to be an abrupt collision. Just looking at those pictures, there really isn't, you know, much space on between that pole and the curb. If a scooter is occupying most of that 4 feet, you really have no choice if you just happen to pass at that same point to really be standing in the street, and you just hope someone pulling into the space is doing so with their eyes open. Or their bumper may actually be up over the curb at that point.
And not to discount the concern, but that presumes that people don't just pause and navigate that narrowing kind of reasonably amongst them. The assumption that you're going to go out in the street is kind of a conscious decision that you've chosen not to wait however many seconds it would take to let someone pass through.
Well, it used to be, but it's hard to walk and text at the same time now, so folks unfortunately put their lives in danger because they continue to text. But, yeah, my opinion would be fairly simple. I appreciate all the discussion you had last week. Sorry I couldn't be part of it. Actually, no, I'm not. But, if from the builder's perspective, the plan was submitted and we reviewed it. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of things we've had to review for this, but if one or two slip through, that's a pebble, not a boulder in the road. If we approved it and it's in the wrong spot, I would just say that we pay. It's not a huge amount of money to move it out of the way and put it in its more ideal location. And I would not want to weaken the ordinance for the distance. I mean, going from 6 to 5 is, it's still a foot more than ADA requirement, but if you get down to 5, then next thing you know, you're going to be 4'6", and next thing you know, it's going to be 4'1". But if we're going to stick with 5, then we really got to stick with 5. And I would just say move the pole at our expense.
Okay, was there any other public comment? Okay, if not, I would accept a motion from one of the commissioners if someone has one.
I hope I worded this correctly, but if I'm going to select option 5, I do not need to reference resolution number 20. That's correct? Okay. I move that we direct staff to move the south light pole, if that's enough of a description.
I think we know which one you mean.
To a location that resolves the violation.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, to move the south light pole to a location that resolves the violation. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 4-1. Okay, that will lead us to development business 8.1.
Item 8.1, resolution number 20-7889, consider request for an exception to section 42-63A of the zoning ordinance to allow the construction of an enclosed walkway over a public utility easement at the Tony's Pizza Plant site at 3019 Scanlon Avenue.
Okay, this has Dean on it, but I don't see Dean.
Or we could just have another staff
We could
person present. It looks pretty straightforward.
It is. I think it is.
Yeah.
He's coming, okay. He doesn't walk as fast as he used to.
I hate to say it, but I'm not in my prime anymore. This is a request that comes to you from Burns McDonnell Engineers on behalf of the Schwann's Group, and they're requesting that you grant an exception to allow an enclosed walkway to be constructed over a public utility easement at the Tony's Pizza plant site. And we've provided a couple drawings in your packet, and you can see from the background information that ever since the Tony's Pizza plant was located there have been utility conflicts on the west side of the plant that have been dealt with various vacations and actions taken by the City Commission, and most recent being in 2018. But there is a major public water line and a major AT&T fiber optic line, and the 35-foot north-south utility easement was retained to protect those. In reviewing the preliminary plans for the Schwann's Project Rise, we pointed out that the connecting link between the two buildings was going to be placed over the easement, and we currently have a footing and foundation permit that is pending, and so this has come before you to see if you will authorize the construction as proposed. We pointed out that the utility easement in this location is 35 feet wide. It's narrowed down from its original extent, and the rationale for trying to protect public utility easements is to preserve access from utility providers so they can get at their lines to do necessary maintenance. We have forwarded this to all the area, local, and franchise utilities. We didn't receive any objections, but we did receive 2 comments, and the comments from our Director of Utilities about the need for a sleeve to protect the city's public water line, and also a comment from AT&T for a similar sleeve to protect their fiber optic line. And so those utilities, if those protections are put in place, don't have any objection to the proposal. So we've tried to provide for you on page 3 some possible findings, primarily to try to distinguish this from future cases. We hope that placement of buildings and easements is an exception, not a general practice, and so we've provided some possible findings for you to take into consideration in our report. So in terms of your options this evening, you could approve the attached resolution that would authorize the placement of this 10-foot wide enclosed walkway in the existing 35-foot utility easement. You could postpone consideration of this request if there's additional information from the applicant or staff you feel is needed to reach a decision, or to allow staff to modify the resolution, or you could decline to approve the attached resolution and provide further direction to staff and the applicant. If you were to decline to approve the resolution, then they would have to come up with an alternate design. So with that, I'd be open to any questions that the commission might have.
Just questions?
Yeah, with the protective sleeve, and I'm trying to visualize, saw the diagram, this is large enough that you, from either end of that 10 feet, you can reach in?
Essentially, the sleeve provides a protection, and then it allows them to go in, and if there's a section directly underneath the walkway, they can pull that section out through the sleeve and to get at that section for whatever they would need to do.
So that,
Which is a really good point. Not only does it protect the utility, it helps prevent the possibility that our work might disrupt the structure that's being built on top of it.
So
is there
that way
like a
we're
lot
not-
of space between the sleeve and the utility?
Yes, there is extra space. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the width of the sleeve exceeds the width of the pipeline, and so.
But it's
they-
not so large, you're not building like a tunnel around the
No,
pipe?
no.
Okay.
It's just enough so that they can slide the section out to get at it without having to jackhammer the floor of the walkway or anything like that in case there was a need to get at that section. The good thing about this is that it's only 10 feet wide and the easement's 340 feet long, so it's a very narrow section. We're not putting an entire building over the easement.
And just hypothetically, if the connector between the two buildings was up in the air, let's just say 15 feet up in the air, would you still need permission?
We would still be spanning the easement, and we would still bring it to you. Obviously, it wouldn't have footings and things like this will have, and there'd be a little less concern, but there actually was, I didn't note it in my report, but there actually is such a structure that spans former Jumper Road, It's an elevated conveyor, and it crosses a utility easement, and that was authorized by the city commission at that time. We initially, in some of the initial discussions, we were led to believe that this was going to be an aerial walkway, but they decided it needed to connect at ground level. So they have been coordinating closely with Martha Tasker, the Director of Utilities, on protecting her water line, and she feels comfortable with this approach.
And I'm speculating a little bit, but if it were elevated, we still might require it to be sleeved just because we have to get a backhoe or a piece of equipment in to do the work we need to do on the utility. We may still have clearance issues, and then it may also create an elevator requirement for the building owner to accommodate that change in elevation for their employees.
I want to say I appreciate the clarification, because when I was reading the material, my first thought was it was an elevated walkway, because in some of the conceptual materials, they had a drawing that showed an elevated crossing, which I think is the one you referred to.
Yeah.
And then as you look at the Burns and McDonnell cover page, they refer to it as a proposed connecting tunnel. And then I thought, well, is this going to be an underground passageway? So it was confusing, but it is going to be a surface.
Yes. I initially, as they did, I initially called it a connecting tunnel.
Okay.
The city manager pointed out to me that that might lead you to believe that it was underground, so I changed the terminology to enclosed walkway.
Okay, so it's going to be like a sidewalk, but it's going to have a structure around it to
Yes,
protect
it'll
the
be, it's set
users
on
from the
ground
elements.
level, have a enclosed sides, and be climate controlled, or at least climate protected, so that people can go back and forth between the two plant buildings.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who was a little bit confused by exactly the way this was going to look.
Well, when I got the application, I asked them for an elevation drawing so I could see how far above the ground it was, and then they told me it's not going to be above the ground, it's going to be on the ground, and that did not match up with some of their earlier concepts, so.
Can the fiber optic cable, if there's a problem 5 feet in?
Yeah, I think it's sleeved as well, isn't
Yeah,
it?
the fiber
It's
optic
sleeved,
cable is going to be sleeved as
How
well.
do you work on something that's 5 feet in?
I don't know if they put play in it. If it's a function of a brake, I guess you pull it out and pull it again.
Yeah, they would do the same thing, that they would use the protective sleeve, then they would pull it out through the sleeve, and if there was a break somewhere under that 10 feet, they would make the repair and then slide it back in.
Okay. So I'm assuming both utilities are satisfied with this option?
Yes, I've got,
From a technical perspective, I don't want to outguess them, but
yeah,
if they're happy.
they did not object as long as those sleeves were provided, and just, it's not exactly the same, but for your benefit, the new, the rebuilt Sonic Drive-In downtown on Santa Fe, there's an 8-inch sewer line that runs underneath that building, because that used to be an alley where it was built, and there's a protective sleeve over that sewer line, the same concept, so that that section of pipe could be slid out from underneath the restaurant if there was ever a need to get at it. So this is a similar approach, but not as wide as the Sonic Drive-In restaurant.
And a similar approach is taken crossing rivers and railroads as well. So it's not uncommon, something our utilities used to working with.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Any comments from the public? Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Hoppick, I move that we approve Resolution Number 20-7889, a request for an exception to Section 42-63A of the zoning ordinance to allow the construction of an enclosed walkway over a public utility easement at the Tony's Pizza plant site at 3019 Scanlon Avenue.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7889. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr.
and we
Hammond.
will communicate that to the project designers.
Okay, with that, I bring it back to the commission. Is there any other business to be brought before us?
I do have something that I'd like to spend a little time talking about. Has to do with our strategic planning process, and of course we did not, normally we meet with a facilitator of some sort in the spring and we come up with a plan, and it's normally pretty general and has some commendable goals, but we've never taken it a step further to actually talk about things we want to do or things we want to change specifically. And what I'm suggesting is that we spend the next, 5 months or so before the budget process, maybe one study session a month, trying to build on that strategic plan and come to the table, and that when each of us with a couple of things, 2 or 3, that we'd like to specifically happen, be able to set some priorities for those things, and then give the staff a basis to work those into the budget process. I have actually written this up, and I've included a sample proposal that's based on our upcoming discussion of the community engagement program, just as a way of a sample. It's fairly, I spent some time on it, and I wouldn't expect all the suggestions to be this detailed, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about this particular issue, so I was able to add quite a little bit to it. And I'd suggest we think about that and maybe have it as an action item on a future agenda as far as things that we might like to, a process we'd like to go through. It's always been frustrating to me to look at strategic plans that you do and they sound good and they go on the shelf and but they're not very good at generating proactive action, and I'd like to see us try to change that.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Thanks
Yeah,
for doing
that's-
the work.
Yeah.
I think that strategic planning is kind of a tricky thing to actually implement, and I look forward to taking a look at your proposals, because I think probably to a person, and maybe it's just me, every strategic planning session that we've done, it has its positives, but I never feel like at the end of the time that we're
going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
that we're all pulling.
Now it does
More or less.
position us to look at proposals that come to us and, make a determination of whether they conform or not. But again, that's reactive, and I would like to see us take a step forward and try to move us in the direction we'd like to go.
Good points.
Staff does
Mr.
have
Schramm?
one additional item. Commissioners, you discussed the upcoming forum and use of allowing signs and whether they're allowed in our meetings in general, as well as whether they're allowed or going to be allowed at the forum. And we tasked City Legal Counsel with kind of researching the First Amendment aspects of that, the public forum aspects of that. I think Mr. Bankston's prepared to give you a little bit of an update, and with that, if we could get some direction from you, if you'd like us to proceed, we can try to be prepared for the upcoming forum.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. The policy question that would be helpful to have just your thoughts on today as we advance the research comes down to the extent to which your thought is that in relation to handheld signs, placards, or anything that one might be able to hold in the context of this meeting location or in a venue such as the TPAC, whether you wish to speak in terms of regulating those within the meeting room, or whether the objective is to prohibit those. Now, briefly, as far as the legal context, we have identified what appears to be the most directly on point case on that question. arose in the context of a school board in Louisiana, and it was decided by the Louisiana Supreme Court and was appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court did not accept the case. They actually dismissed it, and the commentators indicate that that is generally viewed as a level of concurrence in the state Supreme Court's decision. So be that as it may, that is the most direct case that we have. And in that case, we were dealing with a form of time, place, and manner regulation, which in this case involved precluding the signs from the meeting room. And as you might imagine, the elements that are involved are whether there is a significant government interest, and one of the considerations, of course, is whether there are alternative means for communicating the same information, whether that be orally, whether that be in writing, or whether that be alternate means of utilizing the handheld signs. Those handheld signs are constitutionally protected, as you might imagine, by the First Amendment. So that's why it's an important consideration. The current language in your agenda memo, where the current prohibition is referred to, it speaks in terms of the building. So depending on your policy direction, I think our next step would be to, in that we're in the context of regulating time, place, and manner, and given the significance of the two locations where your meetings might occur, I think we want to be sure that we advise you and think in terms of not only within the meeting room, but in the context of these other locations. I have had an opportunity to, Todd Miller was kind enough to provide me with a copy of the bylaws that I would imagine that Commissioner Hodges and Mr. Davis have as a result of their service on the board, and any of you that might have served over the years. But I think that's, depending on where you wish to have us look in a, as far as what you wish to occur in this room, I think the next step then would be to see how we might be able to implement that wish.
Thoughts of the commissioners?
Well, no, the current written policy in the second sentence, on our agenda here is that signs will not be allowed into the building. So that, if I just take that at face value, there's no way to get in this room without coming in the building. So it would, I would think, should be a moot point at that point, but then you have to define what's a sign and what's a handout. And, or if I write something on a T-shirt, is that a sign or?
That is a consideration that, depending on where you all wish to go, that, as you might imagine, is a somewhat harder analysis, frankly, when you're speaking about something that someone is wearing.
I think he wants you to come a little closer to your mic.
I'm sorry. As opposed to something that someone is carrying in the form of a sign. But yes, that's a potential issue, depending on the extent to which we might wish to regulate that form of expression.
And obviously I brought this up, but part of it was because confused, we, in our order of business, we have signs will not be allowed in the building. We've been allowing them ever since I've been on the commission. So we either need to remove that or we need to adhere to it, and I'm not sure where the commission wants to go with that, I guess, is part of the question.
Well, you know, to address Commissioner Davis to some extent, I'm not too worried about shirts. I mean, that's, you know, but I do have concerns that someone holding a sign, and you get 20 of those out there, and it is very distracting as far as being able to conduct business in a reasonable way. It's also, I think, can be intimidating to those who might want to speak on the other side of that issue. Maybe they're not quite as organized or whatever, and it gives the whole place kind of the air of a political convention or a demonstration. I have no problem at all with designating an area outside the entrance to the building where folks can express that form of speech, but I don't think it is consistent with what our objective is here in our meetings, which is to give everybody an unimpeded ability to speak to their feeling, free of intimidation from others in the room. It's the same reason that we don't permit, you know, booing and cheering and that kind of thing. It's just not conducive to being open in that way. Outside, you know, outside the building, outside the entrance, I have no problem. I understand it's a form of speech and that people have every right to express their opinions to folks who are walking in and out. So I mean that's where I am. I'm just concerned where it takes us if we start permitting that on a regular basis.
I'm in the same place, and you know, once you start with a sign, it's like an arms race. I mean, how do you regulate any kind of allowance? I would suggest that maybe we need some language in there that even addresses shirts. I mean, there must be something, some level where things become so egregious that it becomes too big of a statement. But
Several years ago, I'm doing this from memory. I forget what the topic was, but and I forget who the mayor was then. But it was announced that, you know, signs could not be left up facing the commission. If you came up to the podium and you wanted to demonstrate something or show something on the sign, you could use it as a visual aid. But once you sat down, it should be turned around, put against the wall, just so it would not be a visual distraction for the commissioners looking out. But that's only if the signs get as far as coming through the door.
I don't think we need those as well. I mean, as the city manager mentioned, there's many ways to communicate your thoughts, and they can submit something in a visual form to the clerk. They can email us. They can call us.
We arrange to have it showing up on the screen. There are ways to accommodate that.
Would it be appropriate to change that wording that says signs will not be allowed into a building where a city commission meeting is being held? That would handle, or do we have to outline study sessions, open forums, commission meetings?
I think certainly when we're finished, there should be a certainly more extensive statement. Wherever you all wish to ultimately be, assuming there's something that addresses signs and that we are regulating time, place, and manner in some measure, I think we want to document that in a way that anyone reading that would understand the governmental interest being served and why and how it is being done. So yes, I don't think just tweaking that language is where we ultimately want to be. I think you'll probably want a resolution addressing this matter ultimately.
And with respect to the governmental purpose, I think it can be easily articulated, as Commissioner Franz was describing, in terms of it being disruptive. But when you think about disruption of sight lines, disruption of the decorum of the meeting, one item that occurs to me is flags. We've
Oh,
seen that
I had
recently.
assumed that those would be included.
Yeah,
with the
I
sign.
think we may, when we say signs, it may need to be signs, flags, banners, and other devices intended to, and we can work on that wording. But as Mr. Bankson said, the policy question that we're wanting from you this evening is just, is that the direction you want to head? If you do, then we can prepare a resolution as quickly as next Monday for your consideration.
I think that's the direct, after seeing the behavior at that public studies session, and especially with the political climate being as charged as it is, I know that I've communicated with Mr. Scragg about an incident on the Iron Street Bridge, and Commissioner Davis a couple weeks ago referenced that one of the speakers had been struck intentionally or not intentionally by a flag after he was done speaking and leaving, and anything that we can do to eliminate that potential kind of politically charged, aggressive interaction with people, then I'm for, because you just don't know where it's going to escalate from there, and it's not necessary for people to share their opinions with us. It's just not necessary.
It's bothered me
They
for a long time with the breed-specific item we had. I mean, we've had people bringing signs in, and they intentionally, I think, like said, they sit up front, they make sure they're on the camera, and they have them towards you, and it was somewhat, and that's why I've been asking about this, because I think we've been ignoring this, and to me, either abide by your rules or you get rid of them, because there's nothing that's more confusing for whether it's other commissions or at least for the mayor when you're trying to enforce something, and we haven't. It's hard to enforce something we haven't been enforcing. So I think we do need a resolution. I think we need to try to be a little more specific about what we are and are not going to allow, and then be consistent with it. That's the main thing. So
That seems like consensus. With staff, we'll prepare something for your consideration on Monday, and you can take final action at that point.
So
As a sort of practical thing, how would that be enforced in your eyes? Would we?
Well, it starts with the mayor, but we do have,
well, I can tell
security
you right now
in
that
attendance.
if we have a resolution and we have any kind of sign that comes into this room or the room where we're having a meeting, I will ask them to take that out into the hall. And if they don't, we have a gentleman that will help them.
Yeah. And if we extend this to other meetings that we don't necessarily have police presence at all those meetings, they can still adjourn the meeting and request backup, or they can adjourn to another time and regroup in anticipation of people that don't want to comply. So I think we have options. We will definitely need to provide some direction to our staff that support different boards and commissions, as well as the chair people of those commissions.
Okay.
and would what you would be working on now include the broad definition of signs, banners, flags, and where it blends into, for lack of a better term, handouts?
Yeah, I think the city attorney and I need to speak a little bit, but what's occurring to me is any medium intended to communicate a message while in the audience, or while the meeting is otherwise ongoing, we can work on the description of that. But as he said, we're providing an alternate means to make a point with you as the governing body by way of public comment. So I think pretty much all other forms where someone's trying to interrupt your deliberations by conveying a message to you as they're sitting in the audience is that decorum that you're trying to maintain. So we'll see what we can come up with in the way of descriptive language.
Personally, I don't have a problem with T-shirts. I'm more concerned with things that can be,
I don't know if anybody noticed, but the young people today on the bowling proclamation had T-shirts,
they did.
and that's,
Yeah.
My biggest concern is they show up not anticipating that. I guess they could turn their shirt inside out, but then that one may catch people by surprise.
Well, if you've hit upon what is the more complex issue. Anything that we've been talking about generally is content neutral. When you're speaking about, we're not deciding what handheld signs folks are able to exhibit and not. We're speaking of a regulation that would eliminate certain forms of that at certain times. So that is what makes the clothing items a harder question, is that you presumably begin inherently making content-based distinctions.
And to build on that a little bit, and this, I'm not asking for direction on this evening, but we've had this conversation before too, that our approach to proclamations is that we're content neutral about those because it's kind of treated as a public forum. And every now and then, whether it's an elected official or a citizen, I get asked, do we approve them all? Do we exercise any discretion? And our approach has been, from a content neutral basis, we don't. So that one may actually be a little bit harder to solve.
Can I say anything?
Come up and give your name and
Yeah,
where
my
you're
name's
from.
Will Heaney. Basically, I was just listening to this and thinking that it's, I'm all for First Amendment rights and making sure everybody has a chance to speak their mind and everything. But I think he was right, is that this meeting is supposed to be open to everybody. It's conducive to be open to everybody. And anytime you have anything where it's conflicting and may have any kind of detrimental thing to where they can't come here or feel like they can speak their mind, then you've got a problem, because this is supposed to be open to the entire public of the city. I'm thinking to myself is that, and I don't know if it failed this part of federal, but the fact is that when you're polling places, you have to be 10 feet away from, the reason being is because you want to keep it conducive to people are free to go in there and vote as they wish. And the same thing here, to feel like you can come in here and speak your mind as you wish and not feel, any kind of detrimental kind of thing going on, So that's why I just thought to myself, is polling places, they're 10 feet, You can have all the signs you want, but it has to be 10 feet away.
You don't have to run that gauntlet to get in the building that way.
But that's what I'm saying. But the idea is, though, that in that place where the polls are actually, it's a free area to be able to do and think whatever you want. So.
Could you give us your name again? I apologize. I didn't
I'm
hear-
sorry. No, I'm Will. My name is Will Heaney.
Okay, thank you very much, Will. Appreciate your
Not at all.
input.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I'm just anyway.
Yep, so. Okay, any other business?
I can just put the city clerk on the spot. Do you happen to know what day the advance voting opens up upstairs? Is it the 13th?
14th, I believe.
14th?
Yeah, I think this what's today, 12th?
Is it 12?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
I believe it's Wednesday.
Oh,
19th?
18th?
Is he,
He's telling us.
somebody's back. Check your calendar, because we don't seem to know.
I just seem to feel like I think they were saying they were sending out the ballots on the 14th.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking.
So just,
Heard that.
I guess, check your calendars, whatever you get your news from, and know that that service is available, which makes it a whole lot easier to cast a vote.
Make sure you vote.
Right?
Okay, with that, I accept a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We will see everyone next week.